at the 12th Armored Division reunion. First, Ward, I want to thank you for sitting down and agreeing to tell your story to us. And we can start out, well, before you joined the Army, what did you do for a living?
I was a student. I went to North Dakota State University for a year, and then I went home for the summer vacation, and all my buddies had been drafted or left. So I was about the only eligible person around, 18 years old. I took a job driving a truck and made a couple of trips with it, but that wasn't for me. I was bored, and so I told the draft board I'm ready to go, and so they put me with the next group. I volunteered for the draft. I would have gone anyway, but I was anxious to join my buddies and do my part.
Now, where did you go through boot camp?
I went to Camp Abbott, Oregon, as a combat engineer, a temporary camp, just active during the war. Just up in the mountains, beautiful country. All the ground was lava, kind of hard to dig in because your foxhole would cave in on you if you weren't careful, just like a sand pit. But it was beautiful country. We were on the river Deschutes. We built pontoon bridges and bailey bridges across the river. And I enjoyed my basic training. Food was good. I'd had a year of ROTC, and that helped me a lot because most of the fellows hadn't had any military training. I knew my right foot from my left and was able to do close order drill, that type of thing. But I never flaunted my military experience, but it helped me a lot. In fact, the company commander put me in charge of the company one day and asked me to march the company back to quarters. I thought that was quite an honor. But I got a few breaks because of my ROTC experience.
Okay, now when and where did you join the 12th Armored Division? Was it at Barclay or at Campbell?
After, it was at Barclay. After the basic trainings, I had a furlough. And when I came back, they said, you've got a choice. You can stay in Camp Abbott as cadre, or you can go to ASTP. And of course, I had great admiration for those tough sergeants, and I thought, boy, I'd like that job. But then rational thinking said I should go back to college. So I took the ASTP course, and I ended up at New Mexico A&M in Las Cruces, and I was only there 6 weeks, which probably was a blessing because the course was tough, even though I was taking subjects that I'd had before. I don't know if I could have actually stayed with the ASTP. It was really a tough course. So when they disbanded the program and sent us to the 12th Armored Division, I was somewhat relieved.
Now, what course were you studying within ASTP?
I was mechanical engineering.
Okay, so then you were with the trip. Did you go on the Tennessee maneuvers?
No, I joined after the maneuvers. The battalion or the division had been in Barclay for several months when we came home.
Okay. And tell me a little bit about your trip across the Atlantic.
Oh my. They put us on the Empress of Australia, which was a World War I ship that America had taken from the Germans. And I guess it had been used as a luxury liner. But just prior to our embarking, it had been used as a POW ship. They'd brought over a load of German prisoners. Got into a hurricane-type storm, and the prisoners all got sick. The boat still smelled terrible of the disinfectant they'd used to clean it up. Anyway, we had 2 meals a day. We'd been used to pretty good food, but this was British, and they didn't have a lot of food. We were pretty famished when we landed. We landed at Liverpool and went immediately to a Air Force base near Hungerford. And there we gorged ourselves. Most of us got sick. The first time we'd had 3 good meals a day. And we appreciated the Air Force's hospitality, but they said they'd never seen anybody eat like we did.
Now, the trip across the channel.
Were loaded on LSTs, ships, landing ships, tank. We had half-tracks and tanks on board, plus infantry. And the channel was very rough. You look at the LST behind us, and you'd probably have 90 degrees difference in the axis of the ships. They were just rocking terribly. But of course now we had sea legs because we'd already come across the Atlantic. I don't think too many people got sick on the channel crossing. We landed at Le Havre. They ran up the Rhone River and ran the ship aground, dropped the anchor out in the channel so that when the tide came in they could pull themselves off the beach. They had dozer tanks there that piled the ramps with sand so that the half-tracks and tanks could roll off. And of course it was miserable weather, rainy and cold. It was November, just before Thanksgiving. But they loaded us into cattle trucks and hauled us inland to a town called Rouen and another little town called Offay. They pointed out a big pasture, and there was about an inch of water in it. They said, this is where we're going to bivouac. Of course, there was a lot of griping and complaining, and finally the captain said, we've got a barn over there. The farmer says you can use his barn for a bivouac. So that's where we stayed for 3 or 4 days, sleeping in the haymow. At least it was dry.
Mm-hmm. Now, what was your combat duty as a member of the 66th Armored Infantry?
I started out as assistant squad leader in the rifle squad, 1st Rifle Squad, and I lost 3 squad leaders. I ended up being squad leader 3 times. I never got the promotion, but I had the responsibility of the squad. My first squad leader, I don't know if you want to hear this or not, shot himself in the foot. He didn't like combat, didn't think he could make it. So I've got 12 men to take care of in a half-track. Anyway, the the sergeant came. He said, McGill, he says, I put you in for a big promotion. He said, I'm going to make you staff sergeant. And I said, well, that's okay, you know. But a couple of days later, one of the other squad leaders came back from the hospital, and so I became his assistant squad leader. Anyway, he was later wounded, so I'm squad leader again. And that went on until the end of the war. The squad leader I was serving under was wounded about 30 seconds before me, so I said I was squad leader for 30 seconds.
Now, in terms of any famous actions, were you there for the Battle of Herlisheim, were you not?
Oh, yes. B Company was in reserve the day that the A and C Company were ordered to attack the Steinwald. And, of course, I felt, you know, what's wrong with B Company? Aren't we good enough to be the assault company? But later, when I heard what happened to A and C Company, I was mighty thankful to be in the reserve company. We tried to take the woods the next morning, and we got pinned down with a murderous artillery barrage and lost several people, including our forward observer was wounded. So that turned out to be a debacle.
Now, pressing on, the next big action was the Kalmar Pocket. What can you tell me about that, or what do you remember of it?
I remember that well. We left morning. We left our billets outside of Strasbourg early in the morning and traveled to the, I guess they call it the Romantic Road, to the Colmar area, and we set up in the woods where the 3rd Infantry had quite a battle because there was German bodies laying around and 3rd Infantry helmets. So we knew there'd been quite a scrap. We were there for a day, and finally they said the 28th, I think it was the 28th Division, had gone into Colmar, and so it was clear for us to move in. And our orders were to attack and exploit the area south of Colmar. We linked up with the French First Army at a town called Rouffach, and we had a few little scraps on the way down. I remember one town we went into, there was a recon vehicle sitting on the corner of the road burning, and a dead German on the side of the road with a Panzerfaust. He had never fired the Panzerfaust. I don't know who knocked the recon vehicle out. But 2 tanks passed us, and as they turned into the town, an anti-tank gun hit both of them in the back end. I talked to one of the drivers later. He said, I didn't even know I'd been hit. He said, the engine just quit. Anyway, we stayed in that town overnight, and next morning we went on into Rouffach. And there we linked up with the French First Army. We had a peripheral guard duty outside of the town at the foot of the Vosges Mountains. In fact, when we pulled into town, the German soldiers were running up the hill. They saw our unit come into town, and the whole company or battalion, whatever it was, of Germans were leaving town. And so we had a turkey shoot. Every gun in the company was turned on them, and I don't know if we hit a lot of them or not, but they disappeared. They all disappeared. We set up a couple of machine guns to protect our bivouac, and took turns on guard at night. Anyway, one night my buddy and I just came off duty, and we were going back to our bivouacs, and we heard this machine gun pounding away. And my buddy says, oh, that's just those Dagos trying out the machine gun. Turned out the Germans had come down between our machine gun and the one down about 50 yards, got on both sides of the fence in which we had the machine gun, and they walked right up to the guys on the gun. They couldn't traverse the gun because it was set in a wall, and they had about a 90-degree area that they could cover. And Germans wanted to surrender. They didn't want to fight. And the sergeant in charge of the Germans says, hey, we could have cut your throats, no problem, but we want to surrender. There was 18 of them. And it was pitch. It was real dark. The thing that gave them away was that we had killed 2 Germans the night before. They were laying out in front of the gun, and one of the Germans had kicked the helmet. It was such a dark night. It was raining and miserable, and that alerted the guys on the gun. They started firing. But they took the prisoners in, and I guess by the time they got to town, the 18 had shrunk down to about 12. About 6 of them had taken off, probably became civilians and went home. But that's about the gist of the battle of Colmar that I recall.
Now let's see. Next major action they talk about all the time is working under Patton's Third Army
for
the push to the Rhine.
Right.
A few words about that. What stands out in your mind?
Well, the thing that stands out is we were working as a task force. The lieutenant says, McGill, he says, first squad's going to be point for the task force. Somebody's got to be it, might as well be the first squad. So we're in a half track. There's, I think, 10 of us left. And we've got 2 tanks ahead of us, and we're about a mile out in front of the task force. We pull up on the Autobahn, and that's like the interstate highways at home. Anyway, one of the guys says, man, he says, this is just like back in Ohio. And we're cruising down the freeway, and all of a sudden 2 tanks ahead of us turned around, were going back on the other side. And up ahead was a blown bridge. And as we crossed the medium to turn around, we saw that the Germans were in the foxholes down alongside the road, and we all started putting fire in the foxholes. But about that time, an anti-aircraft gun, a 20 millimeter, opened up on us. And the guy sitting next to me was killed. My squad leader was badly wounded, and the driver was wounded. One of the other guys in back. There was 1 dead and 3 wounded, and the rest of us went over the edge. I don't know if the vehicle stalled or if it was actually a hit in the engine, but it had no power. And thank goodness the Germans were only dug in on one side of the road. They were not on the side that we escaped to. And so we left our buddy on the half-track, and we got back safely. Got to the Rhine, and we went into Ludwigshafen behind I think it was the 94th Infantry. And we took an area of town. And the first night they said, McGill, you're going to take us patrol down the Rhine, go to the Rhine and link up with the 97th Infantry. They told us where the outpost was. So it was about a mile, probably, and maybe a little longer. We had a radio man with us that had a bad cough, a cigarette cough. I said, Madro, if you even wheeze, I'm going to shoot you. He was carrying the radio, and he didn't cough all night. But we got to the Rhine, and there was a railroad track right alongside of it. So we kept a bunch of boxcars between us and the river, because the Germans were on the other side. And it was quite dark. But as we went down the street, all of a sudden somebody poked me in the belly with a rifle and said, halt. It was the outpost of the 97th Infantry. But they meant business. They weren't playing. And so there in the dark we met and exchanged situation. And the next morning we were ordered to move, and walking down the street in the column, all of a sudden I heard a pop, and I thought that was a bullet. And the platoon sergeant shouted at the lieutenant. He said, it's a grenade off, it's in your pouch. One of his grenades had detonated in his grenade pouch. He took off running, and instead of taking his harness off, which he probably could have done if he'd known, but the grenade went off in his pouch and killed him. But nobody else was hurt because he had run behind the building to protect us. He knew that his time was up, I guess. It blew another grenade across the street, and it went off, but nobody was hurt. So now we lost our lieutenant, and they pulled us out of Ludwigshafen back to a town called Kaiserslautern, where we spent a couple days. And one night we heard an airplane come over, and then we heard some crashing in the brush. They either had dropped supplies to the Germans behind us or dropped paratroopers. We didn't know which. But the next day a patrol went up and got into a firefight. And we're not really sure. I wasn't involved in the firefight, but the Germans were right behind us, and we were supposed to be in a rest area. After after Kaiserslautern, we crossed the Rhine at Worms on pontoon bridges. And at that point we went back to the 7th Army. We'd been in the 3rd Army, but after we crossed the Rhine we were back in the 7th. And that was a rat race. We would go through the towns and shoot it up, and then the infantry would come behind and clean out the stragglers. And that went on for about a week. I think we crossed the Rhine right mid-March. And we didn't run into a lot of organized resistance. There was pockets of it, but getting close to Würzburg, the Germans were getting stubborn, and we came to a little town. They told us it was being protected by a training battalion of German youth, Hitler youth. Anyway, we had a black company with us of infantry, and they tried to take the town and got badly shot up in the evening. They pulled back, and the sergeant says we're going to have a reconnaissance patrol and a combat patrol, because by now the artillery was knocking the town down. The town was badly involved with fire. And they gave me a choice, because now I didn't have a squad, I didn't have a half-track, I was surplus, non-com. He said, McGill, you can either go out with the recon patrol and reconnaissance, see if we can bypass the town, or you can go with the combat patrol. I took the recon route. So we did get around the town. We got challenged once. We heard somebody holler halt. We hit the dirt and laid there for 5 or 10 minutes. There was no more challenge. Whoever had challenged us must have taken off. And we got back to the task force, and the sergeant says, the task force commander wants to talk to you. Well, I wasn't used to talking to lieutenant colonels, but I did. And he was very gracious to me. He says, Sergeant, he says, if we need you, can you lead the task force around the town? I said, I don't think it would be a problem. Anyway, the decision was that we were going to take the town. So the next day, two platoons of B Company and a platoon of tanks. We crossed the open field just like they used to do in the Civil War. We charged the town, went right through their foxholes and into the town. And we killed 37 of them. And they weren't all boys either. Some of them were mature men. But there was a lot of Germans killed that day. I have a pen pal from that area, a German soldier that writes to me. And every year he goes to this little town of Nassig, and they have a commemoration service for those 37 German soldiers. We lost one American soldier, one of our buddies was killed, and a couple wounded. But the town was secured. Sergeant caught up with us and says, hey, you guys did a good job. He said, but we got to mount up and move out. The next day was Easter Sunday, and we went into a woods early in the morning, and we knew that the Germans were pretty strong up ahead of us because the Air Force was strafing and bombing. And we were ordered to just move out. There was no particular objective given, just that there were Germans in the area. And when we moved out of the woods, there was 4 88 anti-tank guns pointing right at us. They hadn't been over a quarter of a mile from us, and the Air Force had knocked them out. But that was kind of scary to walk into the muzzle of those four German 88s. Anyway, this was my last day in combat, and I knew something was up. I says, this isn't like most of these attacks we've made. We've probably been in a dozen more skirmishes with the Germans, and I said, today's different. And sure enough it was. We were walking in the ditch alongside the tanks, and one of the tank lieutenants says, Sergeant, he says, I want some does in those foxholes up on the hill there, because our flank was exposed. We were all on what we considered the safe side of the tanks. The enemy was on the outside. And the tank lieutenant didn't like that, and so I took 2 men, and we went up and charged those foxholes. There was nobody home. And I went into the foxhole. When I took the first foxhole, I fired into the bottom of it in case somebody would be there. And the sight on my rifle cut my chin open. I was bleeding bad. My two buddies crawled up to my foxhole, saw me bleeding. They thought I was mortally wounded, and they took off and left me. So I'm sitting out there in no man's land by myself. I finally decided it was safer to go back to the tanks, which I did. And there was quite a firefight going on. The tanks were firing and all the infantry were firing. I saw my buddy up ahead of me stand up and got cut down with a machine gun. He got both legs broke and oh my goodness. And then my squad leader got shot, and I was next. I felt like I'd been hit over the head with a baseball bat, and the bullet went in my left jaw and shoulder. And right there, I quit soldiering. I'm afraid I did, because I stood up on my knees and shoved my glove into the wound on my neck. And I made a perfect target. I think that German shot at me 2 or 3 times, but he missed. And so my lieutenant crawled up to me, and he put a bandage on my neck. He said, "Get on that tank. They're backing out," because my squad leader and one of my other buddies had been wounded. I said, "I can't. My arm's roped." He said, "Well, get on it anyway." And I did. And luckily, the aid station was just over the hill from us. We only went maybe a block or two. Came to the battalion aid station. And there we got patched up, put on ambulances, and sent back. We rode, well, I suppose 5 or 6 hours in the ambulance till we came to a MASH hospital, just a tent hospital. And they unloaded us, put us on cots, but there was a wounded German on the cot across from me, and he was just moaning and groaning and making a lot of noise. I said, "You better get that guy out of here, I'm going to kill him." But instead of moving the German, they moved me. And I woke up a day or two later, because we hadn't had much sleep for a week or so. And I heard somebody say, "Where'd this guy come from?" Because apparently they'd put me in a corner where I wouldn't bother anybody. And he said, "Well, he's been here a couple of days." They put me in a plaster cast, and they had an airstrip at the MASH hospital. They flew me to Reims, and I was in Reims a couple of days. They put me on a train and went to Paris, where I was in a civilian hospital, the Hôpital Beaujon, which had been used by the Luftwaffe before the Axis took over, before the Allies took over. Anyway, I was in that hospital I was there on VE Day. I remember seeing the Air Force come over, and they were firing their flares in the air, red, white, and blue flares, and we knew something was up. Then the word came out, the war was over, May 8th. And I guess I was in that hospital probably 2 more weeks, and they flew me to Camp Shanks, New York. Actually, we landed on Long Island. I think it was Mitchell Field. I'm not positive of the field, but from there they took me by ambulance to Camp Shanks. And we were only there a couple days. They put me on the train, sent me to Springfield, Missouri, which is only about 40 miles north of here. I was in the O'Reilly Hospital for, I guess, about a month. And the doctor says, "McGill, have you had a furlough yet? We've been in the States for a month." And I said, "No, I hadn't." He said, "Oh, how would you like a 30-day furlough?" I said, "Man, that'd be great." So he wrote me a pass. I took it to the ward. Went back to the doctor the next day or two. He says, "McGill," he said, "I can't let you go for 30 days. I'd like to have you back for some further surgery." So he wrote me out another pass for 2 weeks. I never turned that one in. But I went home for a month and had a nice furlough. I came back, the doctor says, "Oh, we've been missing you." But he never reprimanded me or anything for taking the extra 2 weeks that he had originally given me. So I spent, I suppose, 3-4 months in O'Reilly. I got discharged. I was 21 a week after I was discharged. End of the war for me.
So is there anything else you would like to add? Or
Well, a lady from the Red Cross came up to me and she said, "Hey, would you like to file for a disability compensation?" I said, "What's that?" And she said, "Well, you've got wounds, you collect money for it." I said, "Well, that sounds good to me." And she said, "How would you like 20% for your jaw and 20% for your shoulder?" I said, "Boy, that sounds good." And so after I got discharged, got home, I started getting checks in the mail. And I found out that a wounded soldier was eligible for a Public Law 16 education. In other words, they let you go to school regardless of how long your service was until you were employable, which was good because my academic record wasn't that good, and I took a lot of courses 2 times, but the Army still paid for it, and I ended up with a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering. I had a lot of breaks.
yeah,
The Lord was good to me.
I hear that a lot. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to tell me your story and share your wartime experiences with us. For the benefit of the future kids, historians, everything else. So, thank you, sir.
My pleasure.